Hello viewers, my name is Dr. Sarat Kr Doley. I teach English at the Department of English and Foreign Languages of Tezpur University. In this video lecture, I will speak on the differences between L1 or first language acquisition and L2 or second language learning. I will briefly focus only on some of the core differences. Before we discuss these differences, a quick look at the basic distinction between acquisition and learning will help us understand the discussion better. Acquisition is described as an automatic and unconscious process. Learning is understood as a process that involves a conscious training. Stephen Krashen points to this distinction that L1 is acquired and L2 is learned. L1 ability is associated with acquisition and L2 abilities are associated with learning. An unconscious and automatic process is at the core of L1 acquisition, whereas conscious and formal instruction is involved in the learning of an L2. The differences between first language acquisition and second language learning may be understood with reference to the three basic learning states of language acquisition and learning: initial state, intermediate state and final state. We will discuss the differences associated with these three different states one by one. Let's begin by looking at the initial state of L1 acquisition and L2 learning. Linguists agree on the fact that the initial state for first language acquisition is facilitated by an innate capacity or genetic disposition for language. Human beings are born with the instinct or innate facility for acquiring language. But linguists differ on the existence of this innate capacity in relation to second language learning. This difference of opinion ranges from the support for the argument that the innate capacity remains for an entire lifetime to the argument that it disappears after a certain critical period in the childhood. Yet, linguists agree on the fact that one of the major components of the initial state for second language learning, since it follows the acquisition of the first language, is the prior knowledge of the first language. First language learners lack real-world knowledge in the initial state of acquiring the language. Second language learners are cognitively more matured and they possess real-world knowledge by virtue of being older. Second language learners are equipped with communication strategies required for various language functions like requesting, commanding, promising, and apologizing in the initial state of learning the language. As far as the intermediate states of first language acquisition and second language learning are concerned, they may be compared by looking at the basic processes, the necessary and the facilitating conditions associated with them. The basic process of first language acquisition is correlated with cognitive maturation. An L1 child grammar, the evolving language knowledge of the L1 learner, develops spontaneously and largely unconsciously as the learner is exposed to the language. The L1 language abilities are dependent on the maturity of the learner. On the other hand, cognitive maturity is not a significant factor in the learning of a second language. The L2 learners reach a high level of maturity and can use the L1 with authority by the time they start learning the L2. Instead of cognitive maturation, cross-linguistic influence or transfer of prior knowledge from L1 to L2 is the process involved in the development of an interlanguage or learner language. This cross-linguistic influence or transfer may be positive or negative. The transfer is considered positive if the L1 structure or rule produced by the L2 learner in an L2 utterance is appropriate or correct in the L2. It is considered negative when an L1 structure or rule produced in an L2 utterance by the L2 learner is inappropriate and incorrect in the L2. Transfer may occur in vocabulary, pronunciation, grammar, and all other aspects of language. Positive transfer helps learn the L2 because the L2 learner does not require learning new structure or rule. Negative transfer may be observed from the presence of L1 structure or rule in the L2 utterance, which is considered inappropriate or incorrect in the L2. Both first language and second language learners need language input to learn the language. Along with language input, reciprocal social interaction is a necessary condition for the acquisition of the L1. The L1 learners need to interact with other people. On the other hand, reciprocal social interaction is not a necessary condition for learning an L2. If the L2 learner is provided with the necessary language input in the L2, even though from such generally non-reciprocal sources such as radio, television or written text, the L2 will be learned. Moreover, first language acquisition takes place without instruction, correction of immature forms or degree of motivation. But second language learning may be facilitated or inhibited by many social or individual factors. Feedback, aptitude, motivation and instruction are some of these facilitating conditions. L2 learners' mistakes may be corrected by feedback. The ultimate L2 achievement may be influenced by the aptitude or memory capacity and analytic ability of the learner. Motivation is the need and desire to learn the language, whereas instruction is the explicit teaching in school or in informal settings. Different levels of L2 achievement may result on account of differences in motivation and instruction. The final state of language learning is the outcome of the process of acquisition or learning. First language acquisition and second language learning differ in their outcome. L1 learning leads to native linguistic competence in the L1. The L1 learner is able to acquire the basic phonological and grammatical systems, vocabulary knowledge, and interaction skills required for communicative functions in the L1 by the age of 5 or 6. This outcome is a universal human achievement requiring no special aptitude or motivation. Vocabulary learning and cultivation of specialized registers like formal academic writing in the L1 are additionally continued till adulthood. In contrast, second language learning leads to highly variable level of proficiency. This proficiency level can never be completely native linguistic competence. At the most, the competence in the L2 may be near native or native-like. Many L2 learners may only be able to reach a frozen state called fossilization. In this frozen state, instances of L1 interference or creative structures not produced by a native speaker of the L2 are exhibited in the L2 utterances of the learner. Instead of a native linguistic competence, the L2 learner achieves a multilingual competence. Before we conclude, let's have a quick recapitulation of the basic differences between L1 acquisition and L2 learning. First, everyone agrees on the fact that L1 acquisition is facilitated by an innate capacity, but such academic agreement is absent in the case of L2 learning. Second, L1 acquisition is correlated with cognitive maturation. Both input and interaction are necessary for L1 acquisition, but L2 learning is dependent more on the process of cross-linguistic transfer, and the learning may occur without reciprocal social interaction. Third, L1 acquisition leads to native linguistic competence, whereas L2 learning may only lead to differing levels of language competence in the L2, ranging from native-like linguistic competence to a frozen state. That's all for now. Thank you very much for watching the video.